So I think we'll make a start. So welcome to this session on, somebody else coming in. Yeah, welcome to this session on really a chance to hear about the particular needs of patients who have spent time in critical care and how they might be supported on discharge, but maybe also prior to discharge, in terms of planning that support that might be available in the community and how social prescribers might support their recovery at home. So I'm Richard Boggy, I'm the Health Partnerships Manager at VONNE, and I lead the work on a programme of work called Healthy Communities and Social Prescribing, which is part of the broader effort to reduce health inequalities across North East and North Cumbria. And Jen's also here from VONNE. Jen, do you want to introduce yourself?
Good afternoon, everybody. So I work closely with Richard around social prescribing, but also do some work on our partnership programme, which is enabling the voluntary sector to influence around health decisions at the highest level.
So the way we're going to run this session is we're going to hear from some of the specialists who work in critical care about the needs of this cohort of patients, and then we're going to have plenty of time for questions and discussion about how we get different parts of the system to kind of work better together and how social prescribing might support this group as well. So quite informal, quite kind of interactive, and it'll take as long as it takes, but we've got an hour anyway. So we're going to hand over to Helen and Julie and Sharon, I think, to take us through a few slides.
I'll turn my mic on. That's always a good thing, isn't it? So, well, I'll just start by doing a few introductions. So I'm Julie Platten, and I'm the Critical Care Network Manager for the North of England. And with me, I've got Helen. Helen, do you want to?
Hello, I'm Helen Sanger. I'm a critical care physiotherapist with a particular interest in kind of pathways of care for our critical care patients from ITU out into the wider hospital and back into the community.
Sharon?
Hi, I'm Sharon Barker. I'm an occupational therapist. I work in critical care in James Cook Hospital in Middlesbrough. And like Helen, I've got a kind of strong interest in making sure that our patients go on to live the best quality life they can once they leave critical care.
Fabulous. And Leslie?
Hello, I'm Leslie Derham, Director and Lead Nurse for the network. But Julie, Helen and Sharon are very much leading on this piece of work. So I'm here to support. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'd just like to thank you all for the invitation to come and talk to you, because we know that our cohort of patients are not massive and are quite misunderstood sometimes. And this will give us the opportunity just to say what critical care is, what our patients may experience, and how best we can help them, and what kind of things they may or may not need. So next slide, Jen, please. So what is critical care? And I think this is always sort of up in the mystic, what is critical care? And I think during COVID, our profile was raised quite significantly, and people started to understand possibly what critical care is, although there was just rows of beds and rows of ventilators and machines that go beep, beep, beep. And actually, fundamentally, we look after patients and keep them alive and help them to recover, sometimes the worst times of their lives. But we do get a lot of people better, whereas we are where in the history that was your last ditch attempt, was you were going to critical care, and if you don't survive, this is your last chance. However, things have changed a little bit now, and critical care is to optimize you and get you as better as I can't speak, as well as we can after some significant problems. So who ends up in critical care? Well, anybody can end up in critical care. You can be as fit as a lop one day, get an infection, and then hey ho, you wake up 2 weeks later and where am I? You're in critical care because you've got sepsis. So it can hit anybody. You can have an accident. It's not necessarily somebody who's got a long-term condition that just gradually gets worse and worse and worse and ends up in critical care. They also end up in critical care, but so do you fit people that this is a significant one-time event that has led them there. So obviously, because people are so ill, they've got prolonged immobilization, although we do try and get them out of bed as soon as possible with the philosophy of I'm out of bed, as so is my patient type of thing. Maybe it's not quite as severe as that, but we do go for early rehabilitation. And it is a bit of a shock to the system. So as I said, you could be fit and healthy, and then all of a sudden you've ended up with all these long-term conditions, which is sort of as a consequence of the illness that you've had, that have come out of the blue. So you haven't had really time to get adjusted to that and come to terms with that. You've just got them and you've got to deal with them. Because of all the drugs and because you're so ill, we can have a lot of confusion and delirium, which again is not a one-time thing and can actually have repercussions later on down the line. And because people are so ill, they have memory gaps as well, so they can't really remember what was happening. So your mind is very good at filling in the blanks. So what it may not have actually happened, or your mind tries to make sense of things that are happening but might not be truthful. But it's like unpicking all of that and helping you sort of understand what's happened to you. And along with that is vivid dreams and hallucinations, which can last quite a long time after discharge from critical care. And then the fear and disorientation. And it's a case of, especially for the ones that were fit and healthy, is this going to happen again? Well, I don't want to do that, because what happens if I end up in critical care again? And it's that fear going forward. So our goal is to support the recovery physically, mentally and emotionally, and get the support and care for our patients going forward. So the next slide is Sharon's going to talk to, and it's just about some more specific things.
Thank you. So, as Julie's just mentioned, critical care medicine has become one of the greatest success stories of modern healthcare. More patients survive sepsis, more patients survive trauma, more patients survive major surgery and multiple organ failure than ever before. But survival isn't the end of the story. Increasingly, we recognise that leaving intensive care is not the same as getting better. Many patients survive the critical illness, but the recovery can be a long and complex journey, and they may not return to the previous health, independence, or quality of life. So NICE estimates that more than 100,000 people spend time in critical care units across England and Wales each year, with the majority surviving to leave hospital. Historically, recovery was often viewed as a simple journey. The patient survives, they leave hospital, they get better. But now we understand for many people that this is actually only the beginning of the recovery. So the impact of critical illness usually affects 3 interconnected areas, and that's the body, the mind, and the ability to think, remember, and function. Physically, critical illness can change the body remarkably quickly. So patients can lose around 1% of their muscle mass every day they remain critically ill. After 10 days in intensive care, someone who was previously fit and well and independent may struggle with things that many of us would take for granted. So standing, climbing the stairs, or walking short distances independently. For many survivors, recovery is measured in months rather than weeks. The psychological impact can equally be significant. Patients may experience that anxiety, depression, disturbed sleep, nightmares, intrusive memories, and symptoms of psychological trauma. So many survivors describe frightening hallucinations, distressing memories, or gaps in their recollection of time in intensive care. We've had patients say that they thought they'd been abducted, that they thought art thieves were active in the unit, and some patients even feel that they've been raped while they've been with us. So quite traumatic. These experiences, as understandably, can be difficult for patients, but also for the family members to understand, and particularly when that patient feels they've recovered physically. Cognitive difficulties are also common and also often overlooked as well. So patients might experience some problems with the memory, concentration, planning and decision making, and this can affect their confidence. It can affect relationships, employment, and also the ability to return to those previous roles that are so important within their family and the community. So together, these physical, psychological and cognitive consequences are recognised as post-intensive care syndrome, or PICS. Importantly to note, PICS is not rare and it's not limited to older adults. It's not only seen in the patients with the longest admissions, and for many, the effects are often viewed as invisible. So a patient may look well, their observations might be normal, the blood tests might have returned to normal, but they still may be struggling with that overwhelming fatigue, anxiety, cognitive difficulties, and loss of confidence to just engage with everyday life. And this is why the focus of critical care rehabilitation has evolved. So the question is no longer simply, did the patient survive? The question we increasingly need to ask is, what does life look like after survival? Next slide, please. So patients are consistently tell us that when they leave intensive care and then when they leave hospital, this is the hardest part of their recovery. So while they're in ITU, they're surrounded by a network of specialist support. So they've got the doctors, nurses, physios, occupational therapists, dietitians, psychologists, pharmacists, speech and language therapists, essentially a whole team there focused on helping them recover every day. Patients and families will often describe ITU as frightening, but they also describe it as a place of safety because support is immediate, it's visible, and it's always available. Then something changes. The patient leaves ITU, the patient leaves hospital. And suddenly they move away from that environment of constant monitoring and support into a healthcare system that feels fragmented and difficult to navigate. And this is where a lot of survivors will experience this feeling of falling off a cliff edge. So when we listen to survivors, the message is remarkably consistent. They tell us that I don't know who to contact. I thought I should have been better by now. Nobody told me recovery would take this long. I felt abandoned after leaving hospital. And many patients leave hospital without fully understanding what's happening to them. So some will struggle to make sense of the memories they have or the memories they don't have, and hallucinations they've experienced and why they feel so different afterwards. So often patients find themselves dealing with problems that they never anticipated, that bone ache and persistent fatigue, that weakness, anxiety, that lack and poor sleep, and that loss of confidence. And for many survivors, the greatest challenge is not the illness that brought them into ICU, it's adjusting to life after it. So families also experience this transition too. Partners, spouses, relatives essentially become carers overnight. And they may be supporting someone that appears physically recovered, but is still very much struggling emotionally, cognitively, and socially. And at the same time, families are also managing their own distress, and they've also been through a frightening and life-changing experience. So for this, a lot of patients and families feel like they've fallen between services. And to illustrate this, consider a typical patient. So previously fit, independent 59-year-old man develops severe pneumonia requiring 3 weeks of invasive ventilation and 6 weeks in hospital. 3 months after discharge, he's no longer critically ill, but he's also not recovered. He's experienced significant fatigue. He's struggling with anxiety and poor sleep. He's lost the confidence to leave the house. He's become socially isolated, and he's worried about his finances because he hasn't been able to go back to work. Clinically, this picture would be success. He's survived, but from his perspective, this is actually only the beginning of his recovery. And this is where traditional healthcare systems need to start to address some of these challenges. So recovery extends beyond that critical illness and beyond that physical rehabilitation. What patients need is support returning to work, welfare advice, community exercise opportunities, peer support, support for carers, and access to local community resources. In our region, the challenge may be even greater because we know that our communities are already affected by deprivation, poorer life expectancy, and higher levels of long-term illness. So recovery doesn't happen in isolation from these wider healthcare kind of issues. Where someone lives, whether they can work or not, whether they have a support network, and whether they can access local community services, these all influence recovery. In the northeastern Cumbria, across our units, we had 13,370 patients who were discharged alive from adult critical care services. However, importantly, 4,110 of those experienced a stay of more than 4 days. And why does this matter? Well, we know that patients who've had a prolonged critical care stay at a significantly greater risk of ongoing physical, psychological, and cognitive problems after discharge. And these are the patients that are going to experience long-term weakness, fatigue, anxiety, difficulty returning to work, and that loss of confidence. Put another way, more than 4,000 people in our region each year leave critical care having survived a serious illness, but are now at substantial risk of needing ongoing rehabilitation and support. So basically, critical illness rather, doesn't end when the patient leaves intensive care. It just simply changes its postcode. Next slide.
You're on mute, Helen, sorry.
Yeah, no, I'm just sorting it. Sorry, my computer's being slow. So to zoom in a little bit from what Sharon was talking about in our kind of population level across the Northeast, the challenge that we have in particular from an NHS point of view is twofold. The first is that over 4,100 patients per year being discharged alive after that long stay across the region is a significant number for us as a region. But actually that's then, if you think about the number of GP surgeries we have in the north of England, that actually isn't that many people per GP surgery or per smaller geographical area. And so their services that people are then reliant on are not able to maintain expertise or have specialist services specifically for our post-ITU patients because they simply don't have the numbers. It would be completely impractical. And so for that and sort of a couple of other reasons that I'll come on to, we often find that our patients kind of fall through the gaps. So to zoom in on kind of a specific patient example, this is a real case example from the RVI. So we are what's called a major trauma centre. So if you have a car accident or another kind of major accident in the northeast, then you will be highly likely be helicoptered into the RVI to come in through our A&E. And so this was a couple, a married couple who were in the car crash. They were one driving, one sitting next to in the passenger seat, and they were brought into the RVI, and they were both in intensive care in the RVI. Now, because of the way that NHS services are commissioned, the pathway of care that you get depends on your injury set. So these people were both major trauma at the point where they arrive at our front door, but the wife, who was the passenger, had an injury set that involved many broken bones, and for this she therefore went down what's called a major trauma pathway route. And what that means is that she was entitled to a nationally commissioned specialist service that involves follow-up from intensive care out onto the ward, a specialist rehab ward, and then 2 years of follow-up as an outpatient. However, her husband, who was driving the car, had predominantly abdominal injuries, so injuries to his organs in his abdomen, He required multiple general surgeries. He actually had a slightly longer stay on intensive care, but he didn't meet the criteria for the major trauma pathway because he didn't have broken bones. And so he was filtered out from intensive care to a general surgery ward and came under what we would describe as RACI, rehab after critical illness. Now that service is limited to a single follow-up on a hospital ward by a medic and a nurse and a physio, trying to kind of catch as many of these sort of problems as we can, and then a single outpatient follow-up, one-off, again, physio, nurse, medic, no 2 years of follow-up, no psychology support, no rehab intervention. And so why this case matters is because the way that the NHS is organised means that unfortunately we have this kind of diagnosis lottery, and intensive care patients suffer from this almost greater than any other patient group, I would argue, because intensive care is a room that people all end up in, or a place people all end up in because of how sick they are, not because of their diagnosis. So I walk onto our intensive care unit, or you could do the same anywhere in the country, and you'll have people with different reasons for being there all next to each other, but they've all become sick enough from their broken bones or their head injury or their sepsis or whatever it is that they've needed to be in intensive care. However, when they leave intensive care, when they become well enough, the pathway of care or the support that they can have afterwards with all of these needs that we know that all of them have, as Sharon has outlined, is incredibly hit and miss. So if you have a major trauma diagnosis, then it's a bit of a golden ticket. Or perhaps if you've had a stroke, then stroke services could pick you up. Or pulmonary rehab if you have a respiratory diagnosis. But we have an historic problem where rehabilitation and follow-up services and support is based on diagnosis, not solely on need. And I think my experience actually of the charitable services sector is quite similar, is that is also organised by, I don't know, British Lung Foundation or Lung UK, as it now is with Asthma UK, it's a diagnosis focus, or, the Stroke Association or an MND association. You have charities that are focused on conditions. Unfortunately, for someone who's been in intensive care, their condition might not fit one of these pockets of possible resource or opportunity to access, but they absolutely will have the need for rehab and support. Next slide, please. So this really, we want to kind of start to finish up you hearing from us and just have a bit of a discussion really as a group that we are, is to think about how can voluntary organisations, social prescribers, people working out in primary care help, and how can we help you as an intensive care MD team, multidisciplinary team. And so our hope is that we will start to increase people's awareness of post-ITU syndrome, of the kind of problems that these patients might be experiencing, so that you and others that in your networks could become a point of contact, that you would be able to, that we and you would be able to signpost to appropriate services, and to kind of raise awareness from us to you, and you out into your wider networks about what post-intensive care means. If you see that someone's been in intensive care, the kind of things you might be on the lookout for, whatever their diagnosis is. And I think from my personal experience, when I see people in our follow-up clinic at the RVI, I am always struck by, we try, and what we use the follow-up clinic for, because we have a single clinic appointment, is to try and essentially screen for all of this physical, cognitive, psychological impairment, as Sharon outlined, and essentially signpost people to possible services. And this is simple stuff. Age UK run exercise classes, Ramblers have, walking groups. There are the Calm, the sort of campaign against living miserably. There are lots of different charities and pockets of resource, and we literally have folder by folder of, according to which bit, what your postcode is, what can we signpost you to. But I know for a fact that I could give a man who's had a long a real case with no kind of, identifiable detail, but a man who's had a prolonged stay in the RVI, whose wife died 2 years ago, and he's now been into the RVI, had surgery, been on intensive care. He's now back home living independently but alone, and his primary problems really are that he's lonely, he's anxious, and he's completely lost his own confidence. He used to love walking. He was going out walking after being home from hospital, and somebody else walking along the same path as him had a dog who kind of jumped up at him and barked, really gave him a bit of a fright, and he hasn't been out the house since. He got hospital transport to come to the clinic appointment because he hasn't left his house for a fortnight. Now, it's one small thing, but that's the level of a loss of confidence, loss of sort of ability to trust your own body to recover. As Julie said, that kind of fear of, what if I got ill again? What would happen if I fell because this dog's jumped up on me? I would have no ability to recover. And so for him, for example, referring to a social prescriber to say, would they be able to go with him to accompany him to the first of the Ramblers group that we had recommended to help him physically to access some of the services we signpost to, because I am confident that I could signpost him to them, but he wouldn't have the confidence to actually go and access the things that we think or know will help. And next slide, please. And I think that's us nearly finished. Julie, do you want to speak to this and we'll round up?
I will. So we came to raise your awareness of us, and also our awareness of what you can offer, because we're both sort of unaware of what each of us do, and to help our patients we need to learn about each other. So awareness campaigns on both sides. So before we started these conversations, hand on heart, I didn't really know what a social prescriber did. And it was like, oh, what does one of them do? So knowing what you do now and where you are is fantastic. And you could offer so much to our patients, but we need to know, how do we get you? How do we get in touch with you? How do we make our patients aware that you're there? How can they get in touch? And also, one of our biggest stumbling blocks is, stumbling blocks is communication with the GP. So we send letters to the GP, but then some of our patients that come back to our rehab clinics, the GP hasn't been in touch. It's not even a phone call to say, we know that you've been in hospital, when you're now home, is there anything we can do? And I do know that I'm living probably in an ideal world, and the GP's services are stretched as well as we have, but just that one tiny contact, even if it's not the GP, if it's the social prescriber, if it's the advanced practitioner, that touch base would just open so many doors, because they would feel as though they have somewhere to go. So our plea, and I think Sharon's going to summarize it in at the end, but it's, how do we work together to help our patients through what's been the worst time of their lives, to be honest. Sharon, to you to finish.
So I think, just to basically summarise, if there's 3 things that you could take away today, we'd like those to be that critical illness does recover for months or even years after that initial discharge. Recovery involves physical, cognitive and emotional, psychological health, and no single service can meet all these alone. So where do social prescribers and communities fit to this? Well, we've kind of thought of 4 key opportunities. First, identification. So recognising that patients as critical illness survivors and helping to explain, which helps explain those ongoing symptoms. Secondly, navigation. Many patients do struggle to access the fragmented services and need support finding the right help. Connection, like Helen mentioned, that access to community groups, exercise programs, welfare advice, peer support, it's transformative. And fourthly, if that's a word, advocacy. Many of our patients have these invisible disabilities and benefit from professionals advocating on their behalf. So for many patients, social prescribers really could provide that bridge between surviving and truly recovering thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you. So
Fine.
over to you.
That was really, really helpful, really good insight into what the issues are. And it sounds like, you know, there should be scope for closer working and for more support to be provided. So be interested to see what people think. Are there any questions to start with on anything anyone's heard?
Stunned silence.
I had a couple of questions. Just thought it was such an interesting presentation. You would have that clinic appointment, that one follow-up. How long do you have with the patient?
It's normally 45 minutes.
Okay.
And that's to have that. I mean, that's out. Every service is different. So that's Freeman and RVI. We have 45 minutes, and you either speak to a medic and a physio in that time, or a medic, a physio, and a nurse. But some hospitals in our region have no follow-up service. Others have only a single professional, so a medic or a nurse, or working alone, and some people have half an hour rather than 45 minutes. So it really is, whatever it is amongst that, it's really just a kind of a screening to try and catch the very worst kind of problems, and a signpost beyond that. It is not intervention or anything more, unfortunately.
It sounds very time pressured. And I presume as well, you have to keep on top of all that mapping information that you have if you're trying to think about different areas. That it just all sounds quite challenging, just looking in.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. And I think that's so. My experience is slightly different from others in the network in that sense, in that the RVI and the Freeman have a lot of patients who come to us from all over the region. And so a big problem that we have in terms of our follow-up is that we don't have a local group geographically coming back to us. So we've got people from, right over from Whitehaven to the south of the region, to the north of the region. So you could see someone from Whitehaven, someone from Berwick, and someone from Durham and Darlington in a single clinic if they've chosen to make the journey or do an online thing. And so that's why for us a big part of it is the very simple logistical thing of literally having a folder for every area of, right, okay, what can we possibly, of the common things that we know in relation to peer support groups, anxiety, loneliness, sort of social reintegration, exercise, what can we signpost to? And my very, very long-suffering colleague, one of the other physiotherapists here, essentially it's a work of love that she keeps that up to date.
And I think that's important as well, because we've got different units across our network, and some are smaller and some are the tertiary centres such as Helen's and Sharon's. Not all of them have a RACI service as such. They have nurses who are interested in this and try and do their best for their patients, but they're doing that alongside the caring for the patient as well. So it's very much a postcode lottery, although we do as a network try and provide standards and give information so it makes it easier for them, but not everybody has the time to sit and source all of this information. So, yeah.
And I worry that because our services are so limited, or in fact, I'm sure this is the case, our services are so limited. So that clinic at the RVI runs for one afternoon every 4 weeks. So you see 5 patients. Now we are 25% of those discharges on Julie's slide. So we've got over 1,100 patients being discharged following a long stay every year, and we're following up 5 people a month. So, the numbers, as to quote what my children would say, the maths is just not mathsing. The numbers do not add up. We are not even getting the tip of the iceberg. And so there will be plenty of people who have those needs, as Sharon described, or this kind of post-intensive care syndrome, who we never even set eyes on, who are just kind of struggling along in the community, probably supported by family and friends, but absolutely with unmet need. You know, you survive intensive care, but you come out, you know, with newly acquired diabetes, renal failure, you know, chronic fatigue, brain fog. You think about all the stuff that people know about long COVID, you know, the many of the sort of the things are quite akin to that. It's really scary for patients and sad for us as clinicians and the people trying to provide the service, that we know that the unmet need is absolutely there. There's a big gaping hole where we wish the services were.
And I think the other side of people attending the follow-up clinics as well, obviously Helen's just mentioned about geography, but also we find that some people don't come because they don't know how to get to clinic, they don't know how to use the bus anymore, or they're frightened to kind of access the clinic. And unfortunately we don't have that resource to kind of work alongside people to facilitate that. So as much as some people are invited, they're probably saying no just because they don't have those skills to kind of work out how to get there. So we're missing people at that point as well, because I know at James Cook we invite people back after 3 months. They're only seen by a nurse and a medic. We don't have any of the therapy team involved. We have 2 clinics a month where we invite about 4 to 5, and their appointments are an hour, because that includes going back to the unit and having a look around the unit, because that is a lot of the kind of part of the psychological recovery as well. But that step to actually come back, or that step to access some of the, you know, the support groups. So we've got ICU Steps, which is a fantastic after critical care service that's available in different areas. Again, not every area have them, but even just taking that first step to go there and meet peers and have some of those conversations and start to really heal. Some of that initial work needs someone to take them by the hand and take that first step through the door. But unfortunately, we a lot of the time we don't know because they've left us, but also we don't have the kind of feet on the ground. And I think that's such a shame. And especially when you think of that age of 59 for your average age, how many people are not getting back to work? It's just really kind of heartbreaking, really.
Yeah. And I imagine for some patients, the idea of coming back to hospital could be quite traumatic and triggering.
Enormously so. There's some work, a critical care nurse who's done his PhD is now doing some postdoctoral work down in Southampton, is looking specifically at trauma symptoms in patients who've survived ITU and people who've survived ITU and are back in the community. And one of the big parts of his work is about how you kind of link that up with the primary care aim of difficult to access populations. And one of the big things is people don't want to access hospital-based intervention because that's precisely what they're traumatized about. So it's, you know, the idea of walking back through the hospital doors, just, you know, no thank you, not a possibility.
Okay, we've got a hand raised. Sorry, I didn't catch the name, but we'd like to come in.
Hi, sorry, I'm Faith. I'm a lead social prescriber in Durham. I just
Hi.
found your presentation really interesting, and just as a social prescriber, it feels like the need that you have fits exactly the service that we're here to deliver. Very much so in terms of connecting people up with the sort of the points that you raised around connectivity and peer support with finances, return to what it's all like our bread and butter. Even, you know, certainly I know it varies from service to service, but our service, and I think most of the services in Durham, go into initial meetings with people, sort of helping people like in person make that step. So I was just thinking, sorry, I was drawing parallels with some conversations I know we've had with the mental health teams around support after discharge. And the 2 things that we've been kind of looking at there is, on the one hand, I guess, raising awareness because nobody's heard of social prescribing amongst the patient group of what we are. And I know that the National Academy of Social Prescribing has some good generic resources that, because it is difficult, we're all different, we all have our own leaflets about like what social prescribing is and how you can access it, but also whether it would be helpful or possible to add something to discharge letters. I think you're right. I can only speak for our GP practice. I'd be surprised if we went out and contacted patients off the back of hearing they'd been discharged from ICU. However, I'd be fairly confident that if the discharge letter included, could the social prescriber contact them, that would get sent to me, and then our team would pick that up, even if it's a, you know, early doors conversation of, hi, this is what we do, are you ready for an appointment now? But if not, you know, do you want us to check back in a few weeks? Or, you know, just like making that sort of initial contact so people do feel like there's support available locally. I don't know, it might all be stuff that you've already done, sorry.
No, and actually, Faith, that is one of the things that we were saying. Maybe we need to put, please raise the awareness with the social prescriber that this patient is here. So hearing that from you has just reinforced that that's what needs to go on our discharge letter. So at least they get sort of flagged to somebody.
Yeah.
What I would actually say is, don't give them the option, do you want to be contacted again? If they say no, I would just do it again.
Yeah,
because
yeah.
Sometimes they're a little bit, not euphoric, that's not the right word, but they're on a bit of a high when they first come out. But actually, when things start to settle down and it's like, well, I can't do this, I can't do that, what about this, what about that? It's not until reality is set in that,
Yeah.
and then they think, oh, well, this is the new normal. Well, actually, no, it doesn't need to be the new normal. But you need to work and you need help to get further on. Because, I mean, 59 is not old. And a lot of these have got years left in work. And actually, that age group, its grandchildren are coming along. And they don't want to be that old man sat in the chair, not being able to play football with them, not being able to interact with them. They want to be able to live. And we've worked very hard to give them that opportunity, and it's so sad when they don't get it. Sorry, I'll get off my high horse.
I mean, that sounds like a really practical kind of suggestion. Maybe that, Faith, maybe we could jointly kind of agree a form of words that would make sure that it does happen as much as we can. Obviously, it's going to rely on the GP to actually involve people, but it might be worthwhile us just collaborating on the wording to make sure it's as good as it can be. Leslie?
Yes, thank you. I said I'd be completely quiet, but this is a constructive question, I think. Faith, we could see we were like, hurrah, because we think this is one of the sort of steps forward. How would we then connect, and perhaps Richard and Jen, this is something you're going to do, with the faiths of all our different areas in this network, sort of thing? Thank you.
So I can only answer that question for Durham, unfortunately, for County Durham, sorry. So in County Durham, we have there's an organisation called Durham Community Action, and a lady called Susan Garrett who oversees a network of all the social prescribers in the county. I can certainly share Susan's email address, and she probably knows who the Susan is in the other localities. So we physically get together once a month, all of the social prescribers, to connect over issues like this, and she arranges virtual meetings and that kind of thing. So she kind of reps for all of us.
That would be good. Sue, I don't know if Richard, that's something you could help us with, getting
yeah, we can help. I mean, it does vary from place to place as to how it's organized, because obviously they're not all employed by a PCN or a GP practice. Some are employed through a voluntary sector organisation or some a local authority. But yes, we do have a kind of through our programme, we have an informal network, and we can get things out, messages out to, but we don't have a list of social prescribers.
There's a Newcastle City GPs, isn't there, that have a social prescriber lead. I know for that, but I remember thinking I'd won the golden ticket, kind of finding that person, and then realizing that actually the next 10 patients I saw were not in Newcastle City, because actually that's quite a small area, and then, you know, relative to it. So yeah, the far-flung places that often stump me.
Yeah. but yes, we can certainly help. But what we can't give is a definitive list of these are the people to contact. But we can certainly help get messages out.
So you will be able to share our presentation.
Yes, and we'll do that. We'll host it somewhere. We'll probably put it onto Breathe, and we'll share through our network communications that it's there, and advise, recommend that people in social prescribing watch it. Yeah.
And get in touch if they want to know more. That's
Yeah.
not a problem. We don't mind people getting in touch. And actually, what I will send you is a link to a book that was written by one of our patients called While I Was Sleeping. And it's Between Life and Death, My Mind Refused to Stay Still. And it was his experience of being on critical care and he describes the delirious dreams that he has, which are quite entertaining, I've got to say. But it just helps you understand what a journey through critical care could be like.
I mean, I'm thinking we could even share that more widely with our health and well-being bulletins, because that putting some meat on the bone, just helping people understand the reality of it, would be of that broader interest. So we'll definitely
because I mean,
as well.
To be fair, in the real life, people see all these hospital programs and ITUs, and 1 minute they're ventilated and the next minute they're sitting up having a cup of tea and then walking out the door, and actually it doesn't happen like that. So but that's what people see and that's what people expect, so having some reality.
Yeah, no, I was thinking, when we describe this webinar, like I want to make sure we give some examples of that, because I never really picked up on the psychological side of things. Yeah, well, once you start pondering about it, it's very invasive just to be there and have things done to you when you're sort of semi-present.
Yeah, which is why people think they've been raped. I can assure you that they haven't. But some of the procedures that we do, like I said in the presentation, your mind tries to make sense of it, and it goes in strange places sometimes. But I mean, if you want us to repeat this, if you wanted to do this again, we would
Okay, thank you.
We would come back, and you can spread the word.
Yeah. Sure. I'm just going to ask, are there any other practical kind of ideas or suggestions as to how we could make this kind of join up the dots on this and try to get better access to support for people?
Who's that question for, Richard?
For anybody in the room, yeah.
I mean, I think for my money, it's continuing to do things like this and just trying to broaden awareness. I think there are, we are all working in statutory and non-statutory organisations who have limited resource and are trying to help people the best way they can. So, as a network, we're doing both work like this, but also, talking to commissioners and national groups to continue to try and kind of raise awareness of this cohort of patients. But it's always going to be a challenge, because relative to the general population, they aren't huge numbers. And so I think it's just that slowly but surely continuing to share in forums like this for me.
Are there any forums, network meetings or conferences where you could invite a social prescriber or a service manager along to raise levels of awareness about what social prescribing is?
So we did invite somebody to our recent Life After Critical Illness, but unfortunately weren't able to come.
But Claire Edwards from Cumbria CVS.
Okay, yeah.
And you the same for the ACT, the services, support services one as well. So we've got at least 2 meetings that, yes, if we could find somebody who could turn up and just give us an insight on who you are, how do we get you, and how can we use you, would be fantastic.
Because
Yeah.
actually working that way around is good as well, because as
Yeah.
Julie said, there are many clinicians. ITU is a funny old place, right? Often as clinicians we're based in ITU, but we do still have like follow-up and outpatients and things like that. So we'll see patients kind of a little bit more along our pathway. Many clinicians will see patients even up to outpatient, but know nothing about social prescribing and really be kind of struggling in terms of what services to signpost. So that way around is good as well.
Yeah.
No, in Middlesbrough we had a life kind of after critical care event recently where we invited patients back to kind of talk through some of the kind of post intensive care syndrome side of things, and we invited social prescribers, so someone from Mind social prescribing in Middlesbrough came along, so they were there to speak to patients at the time and also kind of have that information session. So I think we're trying to make little inroads here and there.
Yeah.
I wonder, would it be useful from your kind of point of view for us to share some links to kind of resources that would be useful for anyone working with a critical care patient? So I know we've got a booklet which is The Road to Recovery After Critical Illness. It's quite a meaty document, but I wonder if someone has got someone on the caseload and they think, I just want to know that little bit more. It does go through quite a lot of the things to think about. So it does kind of go through kind of hair loss or kind of sexual dysfunction problems, or it kind of mentions some of the things that are key that you maybe don't think about. So I wonder if it's worth having almost like a little bit of a list of useful resources that we send you that you could kind of share. Would that be useful? Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
We'll also send you the dates for our ICU steps local groups, and also the website, because that again is a good source of information and a good resource to have.
Yeah, great. Is there
Just
anything
wondering,
else?
Richard, whether we
Sorry.
should invite them to the advisory group in due course.
Potentially, yeah. Or to a network meeting in the future, yeah. Anything else from anybody in the room? Any questions, any suggestions or comments?
I think so.
It's been really informative. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's
I feel like
been
I've
really
learnt a
helpful.
lot.
I'm glad we've recorded it because I think it'll be a really useful resource for people to look at, for us to keep. And we'll just keep the conversation going and see what we can work out, and we'll make some progress.
It's great. Thanks, Richard, for your time.
Thank you.
Nice to meet
Thank you.
some of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.